Welcome to the Protecting Your Retirement Radio Show, right here on Talk Radio 640 WGST. Are you frustrated with the ups and downs of the stock market? Not sure how to invest your hard-earned retirement money? Each week, we'll look at the money-saving tips you need to know to have a successful retirement. Now, from the heart of Buckhead, here's your host, wealth coach, and financial advisor, David Nicholas.
All right, good afternoon, Atlanta. Welcome to another week of Protecting Your Retirement. I'm your host, David Nicholas. I'm excited to be here with you today. We've got a great show in store for you guys. We had a lot of calls from last week's show. We had Alan West on. We had a lot of feedback from the show, so we appreciate you guys tuning in. If you have questions and you have comments, you can always go to nicholaswealth.com, Nicholas Wealth.com. My firm is Nicholas Wealth Management, located right here in good old Atlanta, Georgia. We have two office locations, one at the Cobb Galleria area and one up in Woodstock. But a lot of what we talk about on the radio show is actual client success stories, what we've done for our clients and how we've helped positively impact their lives from a financial standpoint. But I say it every week. I say, look, you can build the greatest financial plan in the world, but if your perspective is in the wrong place, it'll never truly be fulfilling. God does not give us this wealth to increase our standard of living. He gives us wealth to increase our standard of giving. Well, folks, this is a financial show, an economic show. We talk about the issues that affect you, Americans, Georgians, when it comes to investing, finance, retirement. But I'll tell you, it's of vital importance, and I can't stress this enough, that every single one of us get involved in the political process. You know, just talking about it, complaining about what should be done, will only go so far. Over the past couple of weeks, you've had some candidates running that they've put everything on the line to represent we the people. They are patriots, they've answered a calling, and they need our support. Well, I'm excited because with us today, we have U.S. Senate candidate for Georgia, David Perdue. David Perdue is a successful business leader with 40 years of real-world business experience. He's an example, and I love this, of what is capable in America with hard work and determination. His parents were school teachers, but he grew up, worked hard throughout his life. He helped grow some of America's most recognizable companies, including Sara Lee, Reebok, and Dollar General as CEO. I'll tell you, he brings real-world business experience that, in my opinion, desperately needed today in Washington. I'll tell you, he's coming to us from a 10-day, 50-city bus tour all over the state of Georgia. Well, Mr. Perdue, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you, David. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. Well, sir, let's just start with the national debt. I'll tell you, this is a financial show. We talk about the economic issues. $17 trillion and rising is our national debt. We've had federal budgets that have spiraled out of control. And I'll tell you, we're essentially borrowing from the future to pay for today. And in my opinion, this is damaging to future generations. Do you agree?
Of course. This is why I got in this race. I recognize as a father and grandfather, what they're doing in Washington. $18 trillion is bad enough, and it's still increasing, but the $86 to $100 trillion of future unfunded liabilities in Social Security, Medicare, and pension and benefits for federal employees is racing at us like a freight train, and nobody's addressing it. This is absolutely borrowing from the future to pay for an artificially high standard of living today. The federal government's borrowing over the last few years about a third of what it's spending. You can't do that in your personal life. You can't do it in business. Why in the world do our politicians think we can do it there? It's really the greatest threat to our national security, according to 4 past retired secretaries of defense. So it is absolutely the travesty of our age.
I couldn't agree more with that, and it's funny. It seems like, the president, those in Washington, they see it, and it's just business as usual. It's beyond me that we can have $trillion deficits added to the. It's insane. Well, let's move over to the Supreme Court. So we had a big win for religious freedom over the last couple of weeks, and the Supreme Court ruled. It was a very close decision, a 5-4. It was a win for closely held businesses when it comes to religious freedom. Now, as a senator, you could have the opportunity to vote on the next Supreme Court justice. What are some of the things that you actually look for in a Supreme Court nominee?
Well, it's a great question, David. First of all, let me give you my opinion about this ruling. I'm delighted with the ruling, but it scares me to death that 4 Supreme Court justices have to be. They are more concerned about their activist position than they are about the Constitution, because the Constitution is very clear. 5-4 scares me to death on an issue like this. It should have been unanimous. My view about any future appointments is really very simple. We don't want an activist judge on the Supreme Court. That's not what the founders had in mind. We want someone who is going to adhere to the Constitution. And that's it, pure and simple. And we have too many right now, as evidenced by the vote in this particular issue, should give us cause for concern.
Well, folks, we are talking to David Perdue. He is running for Senate here in the state of Georgia. He is years of experience in the business sector. He's an outsider running for the Senate seat here in Georgia. And Mr. Perdue, this is something I think you've had experience in. When it comes to, and I was at a meeting with you recently, and I asked you the same question, but corporate tax rates. We live in a world now where we compete internationally. Now, whether we want to accept that or not is a different story, but we've got one of the highest tax rates in the world. In fact, I mean, there's businesses that are moving out of the U.S. just to stay competitive. As a business owner, as one that has conducted business internationally, how important is a lower tax rate to stimulate growth in our economy?
Well, David, it's absolutely essential. I mean, I have, over my career in the last 40 years, watched entire industries be decimated by bad government policies, overregulation, too much compliance requirement, but more than anything else, our archaic tax structure. Our corporate tax rate is one of the highest in the developed world, and we're sending jobs overseas to countries have tax rates as low as 15 or 20% when ours is 35%. Now, I've seen entire industries like the apparel industry, textiles, footwear, electronics, even furniture be decimated by the domestic manufacturing that is be decimated by these policies. The way forward in my mind is very clear, David. I've gone from a novice to a learner to a supporter to now I'm a fighter for the fair tax. I really believe that the fair tax would level the playing field with manufacturers around the world and let our domestic manufacturers compete. I have a really small business right now. I'm a partner in a small business that's actually exporting U.S.-made products into China, and we know that there's a great demand for U.S. products. If we could get the playing field leveled, manufacturing could come back to the U.S. in great ways and get this economy going and put people back to work again.
No, I love it. Just for our listeners that don't know, the fair tax would actually be an elimination of the income tax, which I don't see how anyone could be against, but it would put a across-the-board tax on items. But what's great about that is it's not taxing on the incomes, it's not taxing on income growth, but it's taxing at the purchase place, and I think that would just be a huge, what we desperately need when it comes to our tax code in Washington. Couldn't agree more with that. Well, just touching on finances, we'll ask you a quick question on this. Dodd-Frank. For many of our listeners that may not know, in our world, we had the Attorney General on about a month or two back, and he said that Dodd-Frank is to the financial industry what Obamacare is to the healthcare industry. In your opinion, Dodd-Frank, elected to Senate, would you do something to try to repeal it? Would you try to tweak Dodd-Frank? What are your thoughts on that, just quickly?
Well, I was the first one in this race to really start calling out that Dodd-Frank, in my opinion, is even more insidious than Obamacare. So we all know that what the press has been saying about Obamacare, as bad as that is, and I believe fully we've got to repeal Obamacare and replace it with something reasonable from a market-driven solution. But Dodd-Frank is taking over small banks. It's really taking over credit. I mean, it looks to me like with Dodd-Frank is fully implemented, that small banks, community banks, are going to have a real hard time competing. And so what it's going to do is generate an entire wave of acquisitions of larger banks buying into smaller banks, and that means decisions for lending will no longer be made down the street. It'll be made back in some corporate headquarters. And we saw what kind of problem that gave us back in 2009 when a few banks in New York got over-levered and created a real crisis in liquidity when the small-town banks didn't have that problem. They weren't over-levered, and yet they're the ones paying for that right now. Dodd-Frank needs to be repealed. And it was insidious to begin with. It was crammed down the throat of the minority, and it's going to destroy small businesses in America because they can't borrow the way they could just 6 or 7 years ago.
And, as a business owner, I run an investment firm here in Atlanta, and I can tell you, for small businesses, the amount of regulation that we even deal with in our business, it makes growth very tough, very tough. Can you just talk about that quickly, the business environment here in America? Is it friendly to businesses, or is it sometimes it seems our government is working against us as business owners?
Absolutely. In the last 6 years, we've gone from a capitalistic society to an administration that's trying to manage this economy and take control of this economy, and therefore it is abusing the capital energy that we have in this country. We can talk about energy, we can talk about Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, but small businesses right now today, over two-thirds of them have either stopped hiring or have cut back employment because of Obamacare and Dodd-Frank. We have the lowest percentage of people working in America today than we've had since Jimmy Carter. And it's largely because of these bad government policies, primarily the last 6 years. We've pumped $3.5 trillion into this economy from the Federal Reserve in the last couple of years. And, David, this economy ought to be booming with that, and yet we've just gone through 1 quarter of negative GDP growth. We may have a second quarter here, which means we're moving into a recession. And so what I'm looking at is the way forward is not that complicated. We need tax reform, regulatory reform, and actually finally get serious about energy. We have a God-given boom in energy right here that could drive us for the next 100 years if we would just use it judiciously. So those are my 3 tenets of trying to get this thing moved forward. And the last thing, David, I would say is, it's tied into the economics of this thing. It's a political issue, but we need term limits. The drive to get reelected combined with big special interest money in Washington is what's distorting the decision-making process, combined with the fact that we only have about 10 people in the United States Senate with any real business experience, and you've got the formula for the results that we have right now, the unacceptable, terrible results we're getting out of Washington right now.
Well, whenever you bring up the word term limits to career politicians, I think you would call it them fighting words right there is what that is.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. They don't like that at all.
They don't like that. They don't like that. Well, switching gears here, folks, we were talking to David Perdue, business owner, over 40 years of experience. He's run some of the largest and known names of companies here in the U.S. You were at Church of the Apostles recently when Lieutenant Colonel Alan West spoke, and he mentioned something in his sermon about separation of church and state, this idea that there is this concept in the Constitution, but there's actually not. Why, just from your opinion, why do people always bring this up as part of their argument, separation of church and state, when combating religious freedom?
Because it doesn't fit their progressive style, their progressive mantra, and that is that, oh, no, we can't have God involved in the United States government. Well, yes, we can, and we should. That was the way it was founded. Our founders never intended that separation. That was a letter from Jefferson, and it didn't have anything to do with how we bring God and faith into making decisions in the federal government. Let me give you another example, though. I mean, I want listeners and all the voters and everything else. A lot of us have angst right now about what's going on in Washington, and we don't have a peace. And there's a verse in Philippians that says, be anxious for nothing, but through prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Well, it looks to me like that what we're not doing as a population, those of us who are believers, are not praying at the level that we ought to be praying to get divine guidance about how to get out of this crisis. And to me, that's one of the reasons I got in here. This is not about, a religious campaign. I'm out here, arguing on the political issues, on the economic issues, and so forth. But what pulled me in here was our fiscal irresponsibility and what it's doing to our children and grandchildren. And I love what the Colonel said in that talk he gave on Sunday before 4th of July. It's really the best speech I've ever heard about this issue of church and state.
Well, folks, we are talking to David Perdue, running for U.S. Senate here in Georgia. And, Mr. Perdue, we've got about a minute left. Can you just tell our listeners why you are the candidate that Georgians should come out? And you basically just gave it, but I'll give you another shot to say it again, just in about a minute, that why voters should come out and vote for you over your opponent.
Well, thank you, David. I think the decision in this race is very clear. If you like what's going on in Washington, you need to vote for my opponent. He's been there 22 years. If he were really going to make a difference, he would have done it already. But if your listeners are as outraged as I am by the size and scope of this government, by the excuses they're giving us for not securing our borders, and by this unbelievable debt they're piling on the backs of our kids and grandkids, then I hope they'll look at this, outsider from Middle Georgia and stand up with me and help me take our country back, David. That's why I got in this race.
Folks, if you have more questions, you can go. I think the website is PerdueSenate.com. Is that the correct address to you guys decide if they want to check a little bit more about you?
That's great. Now, we have PerdueSenate.com, and there's another one called 22years.com, which covers the voting record of my opponent. People need to know that as they make the decision. But PerdueSenate.com, we're finishing this tour next Saturday. We do a fly around next Monday. We're going to make 50 stops. We're in Calhoun right now. We're going to be all over North Georgia and then South Georgia later in the week.
Well, folks, rarely do I come out and say this, but I can tell you, in fiscally where we're at as a nation, this is the time for proven business leadership. Because, it's easy to keep things status quo the way they were. This is the time for folks that have gone out, they've had the experience, they've been in the business world to take those same principles to Washington. And folks, the date to go out and vote, July 22nd, for the runoff here. Folks, I encourage everyone to get out and vote. Mr. Perdue, we appreciate your time. We won't keep you any longer. I know you got a busy day ahead of you. We appreciate your time. Best of luck to you on July 22nd.
That's great, David. Thank you. God bless you, man.
Absolutely. Well, folks, don't go anywhere. After the break, we're going to be talking a little bit about the markets, what you can do now to make sure that you've got a portfolio in line, God forbid. We've got quantitative easing issues coming back. We've got the Federal Reserve issues we're going to talk about. Don't go anywhere. When we get back from the break, we're going to show you what you can do now to make sure your portfolio is aligned correctly. I'm David Nicholas for Protecting Your Retirement. We'll see you guys right after the break.